We left off here on page 87 at this title, Yahweh's Blessings. Yahweh's Blessings. Now that's page 87 in the older book. In the old book, I don't know. I'm not sure where it is in the new one. I use the old one because that's the original one I had, and that's the one I like. Okay, Yahweh's Blessings. Now we've been looking into the Solomon's sin. Okay, and how this is not Yahweh's feast when these things are kept according to the way that Solomon fell. So we see here Yahweh's blessing. It says, Solomon did not receive instruction from Yahweh to change his ordinances in any way. Yahweh's way of setting his feast is based strictly upon his blessings of green ears of barley, which he would send to his people at the exact time it was his will to send them. Okay, because Yahweh's ordinance do not change. You can't change Yahweh's ordinance. They're set forever, okay? If you could change them, what benefit would they be? It would just cause utter confusion, which you see in the world as they do these things. But Yahweh, notice, sets it at the exact time. He's in complete control. And you see that even in the weather that we've had here, right? You know, you can see how Yahweh waited, until his exact time when he's going to bring forth the green ears, and we'll see them, and then we'll see the next new moon that comes, and then we'll know that that is Abib. So if we've shown previously in the book, the 365 days, the story of our calendar by Irvin, pages 171 and 172, it says the sun is not directly responsible for the variations in temperature that occur on the same calendar date of different years. It says the advance of spring from the time of the spring equinox to that of the summer solstice is viewed on the calendar as shown by the rising position of the sun towards its highest position in the sky, and is completely steady and completely resistant to changes. Of course, it's resistant to changes because that's the laws of Yahweh. Okay, the laws of Yahweh say that everything will be in exactly where it's supposed to be. Let's look over here at but now, first of all, let's cover this here. We talk about the spring equinox and the summer equinox, okay? I'll get that ready, but the fertility rites, which we've covered earlier, right? The fertility rites, here's the thing about the fertility rites. The fertility rites were understood to be an assurance of a bountiful crop, right? That's why they did them. So the soil would be fertile and it would bring forth bountiful crops of the earth. However, you see, that's Satan's counterfeit because it's just the opposite, okay? The fertility rites were sin. It's fornication, adultery, bestiality, you name it, okay? And Satan, of course, counterfeits everything. So it wasn't, the fertility rites that they practiced did not assure them of a bountiful crop. Instead, they ended up cursing themselves because, as we know, through their sin, they cursed the earth, they cursed the water, they cursed the atmosphere and so forth. So everything that they did actually poisoned the earth rather than bringing forth what the gods deceived them into thinking that they were going to bring forth. Now, in Genesis 4, verse 11 and 12, when Cain was told, it says, so now you're cursed from the earth. Remember? You're cursed from the earth, which meant that the earth wasn't going to be able to bring forth what it should. In Genesis 4:12, Yahweh said, when you work the soil, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. Okay? So, why? Because he was cursed from the earth. Mankind, as soon as when he broke that covenant with Yahweh, now he could no longer have the bountifulness. Instead, he brought a curse upon himself. And so the soil itself would not yield its strength because it's cursed. Now, all this is based upon the observance of the worship of the sun, okay? And if you notice too, now that's Satan's way, okay, is the sun worship. Yahweh's way of his calendar, as Satan shows, hers is a solar year. Yahweh's is a lunar year. Right? Now, when you think about the word lunatic, okay, it's a person affected by insanity that's supposed to be influenced or produced by the moon or its position in its orbit. So a lunatic is supposed to be a madman, okay? So anyone who is to look at the moon, okay, is supposed to be a madman. And that's exactly what the scripture warns us about, right? Satan makes it look like you're crazy or you're insane if you look for the new moon. But remember Colossians 2 verse 16 says, let no man condemn you, okay, in observation of a feast or observing the new moon, right? So you can see how Satan has used that in a means in which to make Yahweh's law. If you observe Yahweh's law, she always makes you look crazy, right? And that's what this prophet spoke about when they said, those who do righteous will be looked upon as being mad, okay? And that the world will look upon righteousness as evil and evil as righteousness. Just the opposite of what Yahweh says to be done, okay? So, let's continue here. One other thing, though, the solstice, okay? The solstice, the word solstice means, it's from a Latin word solstitum, solstitum, and it means sol, S-O-R, S-O-L, which is the sun, okay? And then S-T-O, which means to stand. And so it gives you an idea, when you look at it, you can see that that's exactly what they do with the sacred pole. They stand it up in the sun to observe the equinoxes and the solstices, to be able to fall into the same sin that Solomon did. Now, the word equinox, it's supposed to mean equal day and equal night. But really, that's not really true because of the earth, the way the earth is, it's not really equal days and nights because the earth is a globe and you also have refraction through the atmosphere and so forth. So you really don't have exactly equal day and equal night, you know. So that's kind of like something that Yahweh's thrown in there to kind of like show the deception that there is in there too. Okay, so back in the book here, it says, it talks about, so the rising of the sun to its highest position in the sky is completely steady and completely resistant to changes. Yes, it's law, okay? And as it says here in Psalm 104, let's look at this, Psalm 104:19. Let me get this larger. Can you see that? Psalm 104:19. Now, yeah, it's not focused, is it? There you go. Okay. You appointed the moon for setting the feast. The sun knows it's going down. So notice, you appointed the moon. That's in the very beginning. Genesis 1:14 through 18, right? Yahweh set the moon for the time period that he said he would meet with his people. So he appointed the moon, okay? He appointed the moon, as it says, for... Now notice, he appointed it, which means he set it in place, and it's according to his time that he sets this. But he appointed the moon for setting the feast, and the sun knows it's going down. So you notice, in Genesis it says that Yahweh made two great lights, right? He made the sun to rule the day, the moon to rule the night. Now, we know, this, as it says here, the sun knows its position. It knows to go up and down, okay, so to speak, right? It knows what to do, just like the moon knows what to do. And Yahweh calls the moon as a faithful witness in the sky and so forth. So Yahweh made these things to do exactly what they're supposed to do. And through that, as you read throughout the Psalms, you see that everything praises Yahweh, okay? Because it does what it's created to do, okay? And that's what we're supposed to do. But mankind has gotten away from that, okay? But originally, Yahweh made man to become made into his image and likeness, right? But man has kind of fallen away, and so now we're on the trip of going backward to achieve that goal. All right, so it continues on the second paragraph. But the advance of springtime, that time of the year when living things, stimulated by the increasing warmth, burst into increased activity. Okay, the springtime. It's neither completely steady nor free from year-to-year variations. Okay, it's not steady nor free from year-to-year variation. Yes, Yahweh is in control. Okay, and it varies from year to year. Yahweh's the only one who can regulate these things, okay? And you see this in, let's go to Genesis. Genesis 8, look at 8:22 here. Genesis 8:22. Go up. There we go. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and winter and summer, and day and night shall not cease. Okay? That was whenever Noah went into the ark and came out of the ark. Okay? And Yahweh says the seasons and so forth, all of this thing is going to continue on, this cycle. It has to, or man would die. Okay? So that cycle will continue on. But it varies from year to year. It's not set. Yahweh's calendar is not a set calendar in the way that man sets it according to the sun and so forth, okay? It's set according to the way that he establishes. And that's what causes a lot of confusion in the minds of the people, for the fact that they're used to that solar calendar, which, this day falls on this day every year. Well, Yahweh's the same way. Abib 1 is always Abib 1. Right? The Passover is always on Abib 15th. That never changes. Now the days of the week and so forth, that can change. But Yahweh is in control. You have to do it according to the way that he says. So continuing on here, it says, thus the sun's position, such as spring on April Fool's Day, can be predicted with full accuracy long before the event. But, notice, the top temperature that will be reached that day, and the nest building progress of the birds, the leaf sizes of the oak trees, and all of the other responses to life, or of life, to springtime, can never be subject to an accurate prediction. Because no man can tell you that. You can't go out there and tell me how large a leaf is going to be this year. Right? You can't do that. Man cannot do that. Man does not have that ability, but Yahweh does. As it says, it's Yahweh who is directly responsible for the variations in temperature. So it is he who controls the temperature, which bring on the green ears of barley, which he wants them, or when he wants them to develop. Okay, so it's all in Yahweh's time. You have to rely, and really what that does is it teaches us to rely upon Yahweh and to trust in him. In let's go to Psalm 74. Psalm 74, verses 16 to 17. Remember, Yahweh is the one who's in control, okay? Verse 16 and 17. The day is yours, and yours also is the night. It was you who caused the moon and the sun to be. It was you who set all the boundaries of the earth. It was you who made summer and winter, okay? So Yahweh is the one who is in control. Also, let's go to Jeremiah. Jeremiah 31, and you see here in verses, notice verse 35. This is what Yahweh says, who gives the sun for a light by day, and the ordinance of the moon and the stars for a light by night. That's in Genesis chapter 1, right? Who stirs up the sea, and so its waves roar. Yahweh of hosts is his name. If those ordinances depart before me, says Yahweh, then the seed of Israel will also cease from being a nation before me forever. Okay, so Yahweh is the one who watches over everything. He's the one who is in complete control over everything that takes place. Now, continuing on here, it talks about the Interpreter's Dictionary, Volume 4, page 923, shows the oldest calendar was distinctly agricultural, in that it reckoned time primarily by the state of the annual crop. And then this article says, the oldest calendar, aptly termed the Pentaconte Calendar, which that's not really exactly accurate, okay, because Pentaconte, it's an agricultural calendar, but it's broken down into periods of 7 segments, and periods of 50 days, and then they supplement so many days, 15 to 16 days in there to make a full year and so forth. But notice it says the oldest calendar, what you want to realize is talking about an agricultural calendar. Okay, so the oldest agricultural calendar was employed by Israel uninterrupted until the time of Solomon. Okay? It was interrupted until the time of Solomon. And it was distinctly agricultural character in that it reckoned time primarily by the state of the annual crop. The day of cutting the first sheaf of the new crop constituted its New Year day. Okay? Remember on the Sabbath day, albeit 15th, the priest went out, they had the sheaf ready and so forth, they cut it and they said, on the Sabbath day, yes, on the Sabbath day, and they cut it down, and then it was taken, the sheaf was waved and taken and made into the offering for Yahweh. So all of these things are done exactly according to Yahweh. Now the thing is, this Pentaconte, okay, when it's they break it down to 7 periods of 50 days and stuff, the confusion comes in because, remember what they do is they look at Leviticus 23. Remember what it talks about the time period between the Omer offering until the day of Pentecost. You've got to count 7 weeks and you get to the 50th day. Well, that's accurate and true, but that's just for one feast. Okay? That's just for the Feast of Pentecost to tell you how to get there. It's not something that's carried on through the rest of the year. You don't continue on your count at the Pentecost and count in segments of 70 and 50 and so forth. So they're in error there. But the same page in the Interpreter's Bible Dictionary shows us when Yahweh's ordinance of the moon was changed and by whom it was changed. And of course that was Solomon, king of Israel. Okay. Now you see here it says a calendar which would be uniform not only for the entire Israelite nation itself, but also for its neighbors was indispensably. In other words, a calendar of international and even of universal character. Well, we certainly know what the universal character is, don't we? That's exactly what took place. When the calendar of Yahweh was changed, the Catholics took over, right? And they had full authority. Now, you got to remember, okay, now this took time to develop. And the thing is I remember eventually when Solomon had married these pagan women and so forth, it weakened him, it weakened his character, and he went out and he ended up, falling short of Yahweh and setting up all of this and actually participating in these things by allowing them to be built and so forth. But these women, you see in the scriptures where the women in Yahweh's temple, just like we have the Kahanas and so forth today, the women served Yahweh. They had their place at the temple there where they served. And if you remember Eli's sons and so forth, and remember they corrupted these women and so forth. And so you can see how they began at an early stage to start taking over the temple to where by the time it reached Yeshua's time, it was completely corrupted and so forth. So we see here, he says, this calendar of international, even of universal character. By the first quarter of the 10th century, BY, the Tyrians, then the world's foremost colonizing and internationally commercial people, had involved in such a calendar, one distinctly solar in calendar. Okay, the Tyrians. Now, you see about them in Nehemiah. Let's go to Nehemiah. Nehemiah 13. Get it. I guess I should have marked all these places. Nehemiah 13, let's look at verse 16. Nehemiah 13, 16. These were the ones that were responsible. If you remember, they came into Jerusalem. It says, verse 16, the men of Tyre living in Jerusalem brought in fish of all kinds of merchandise. Notice, merchandise. And they sold them on the Sabbath to the children of Yada in Jerusalem. Okay, so they were the ones who were responsible for coming around. If you remember, they came around and caused Israel to sin, because here they came, and they were selling the merchandise and so forth on the Sabbath, remember? And Nehemiah said, look, you come back around here, you're going to be in trouble, because he told them, he forced the gates closed and said, don't come back around or you're going to suffer the consequences, So he talked to people, you need to keep the Sabbath day. And it's pretty pathetic, but sometimes, the men of Yahweh had to stand up and do certain things to get the people's attention. All right, so it says here that the Tyrians, they were allies and they made it official for Israel, notice. So Israel adapted, okay, to this and adopted this calendar. The year of the calendar was, of course, specifically solar. Solomon set his New Year's Day upon the day of the autumn equinox. This day with this course, this day and with this, of course, the precise duration of the year could be determined quite accurately. No, it's not true. It's simply an ordinance of the sun. We read in Jeremiah 31 where Yahweh said he set these ordinances of the sun, and in Jeremiah 31:35, Yahweh says he gives the sun for the light by day and the ordinance of the moon and the stars by night. So Yahweh sets these things up. He is the one who determines the time. Mankind always likes to figure out and become a god. Okay, he likes to become a god, and he always likes to figure out how the Creator has done something. Okay, and that's what's gotten mankind into trouble, and he's always tried to do that, and it has messed them up tremendously and pulled them away from Yahweh. That's why the whole world is deceived. Yahweh's ordinances are forever. Yahweh has never given anyone permission to change his word in any way. In fact, there are many curses pronounced upon anyone who does. Yahweh commanded the first moon of his sacred year to be the new moon of green ears on the 15th day of the first moon, the 14th day after sunset, on the Passover Sabbath. Yahweh's sacred year began. Now, for anyone who may not be familiar with that, let's just real quickly look at that. In Exodus chapter 12, okay? And of course, everybody should have all these references in the book already, right? But in Exodus chapter 12, verse 1, it says, "And Yahweh said to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this moon will be the beginning of moons. It will be the first moon of the year to you." Okay, so he plainly tells you, this is the beginning moon. It's going to be the first moon of the year to you. So how do we know which moon that is? Well, if you remember, you go back whenever the plagues were taking place, because he just told you it was in Egypt, right? Yahweh showed Moshe and Aaron in Egypt that this would be the first moon. You look here in chapter 9, okay, verse 30, it tells you when the hail came down, now the flax and the barley was struck, for the barley was in the ear, the green ear, and the flax was in the bloom. Okay? So we know that that was the time of the year, and that's why Yahweh says, look for the moon of green ears. Okay? So it's very plain to see when it was. Okay? And that's the beginning of the moon. That's the beginning of the year. The count towards the beginning of the year is to look for that new moon, count off till the feast time. Now let's go back to the book here. It says, the oldest calendar, this is that same article, the oldest calendar, aptly termed the Pentaconte Calendar, and employed by Israel uninterruptedly until the time of Solomon, was of distinctly agricultural character in that it reckoned time primarily by the state, notice, the state of the annual crop. The day of the cutting of the first sheaf of the new crop constituted its New Year date. Well, the Passover, of course, according to the crops, you had the Passover, you had the green ears of barley. Pentecost, you had the wheat harvest. And then, of course, the autumn crops or tabernacles, you had the time of the ingathering, the Feast of Ingathering or the Feast of Tabernacles. So everything was set up according to the crops. Okay, it was an agricultural calendar because man, and this is why Yahweh says man doesn't live by bread alone, but by every word, right? You will be blessed with the food that is necessary, which will grow in its proper seasons if you keep his laws, he said. Now he says there's nothing spectacular about a simple ceremony of cutting a few heads of barley, then giving thanks to Yahweh our Father for the blessings of the green ears. In the eyes of this world, that would be nothing compared to the ceremony that eventually took place by the use of the sacred pole, the cult object called Asherah. The cult object was nothing more than a perpendicular pole. We've already seen how the equinoxes and solstices are certain upon the high places, but what did the pole that was used there represent? What made the pole, the straight pole, an object of worship? Okay, this next segment is a cult object, a pole. The Interpreter's Bible Dictionary, Volume 2, page 602, tells us about the high places. And it says the high places were essentially Canaanite, apparently from as early as the second half of the third millennium. And then Israelite sanctuaries situated on high hills and associated with green trees and leafy oaks. There could be an open or roofed sanctuary. It was also frequently equipped with houses and halls or buildings of various kinds, including, notice, raised platforms, okay, as if found at Beth Shen and other places. Now, the raised platforms, if you look back here on page 82, you see that picture of the raised platform. You see that? That man standing on a raised platform. You see here the pole, and you see the sun coming up as the sun is rising there, okay? So they would observe these things from that. Now, let's see. Okay. I just had the page. There it is. You have that, and in modern times you have that, and that. So you can see right here what's occurring. This is in the Vatican, okay? This is looking down. You see the shadow of it here. The sun is back here shining forth. And if you notice, as we talked about before, you see all of these little minute markings that go all the way around. Here is a better picture of that. And here you can really see the markings. You see, there's the obelisk, okay? And remember now, this came from Egypt. They carried this all the way from Egypt, and it was moved underneath the Pope's direction under the threat of death if they broke it. So, and at first, no one wanted to take on the job. You know, no architect wanted to take on the job because their life was in danger. And then finally, one of them did, and I forget exactly how long it took, but he actually moved it all the way from Egypt. But you see here, you have the pole, and then you have all of these markings around here. Now these segments here, of course, look like a sunburst, but they represent, as you see, as a shadow being cast right here. Each one of them represents the solstice and the winter solstice and the winter equinox, the autumn equinox, and the summer solstice and the summer equinox and so forth, the vernal equinox. So that's always set up right there. Now this is where people come, okay? This right here, lots of times when you see the big ceremonies and stuff that they have, the Pope has, okay, they come out, and this is where all the popes and the cardinals and stuff will sit down. This is where they hold mass. This whole area right here is covered with people. This whole area fills up with people everywhere. And so they're standing right there amongst that pole, participating in this mass of eating the body and the blood of their God, okay? So you can see the abominations that they carry forth. And it's kind of like the apostle said, the prophet said, Yahweh said, come and you'll see greater abominations than these. And they could actually see these things in prophecy. The prophets were actually able to see these things taking place. Okay, now, on these raised platforms and these sacred poles and stuff, 1 Kings 13. Jeroboam, remember he was the one who set up the area to pull the people away to keep them from going to the feast. But what he did is he set up to where anybody could become. Jeroboam ordained a feast in the 15th day of the 8th moon, like the feast held in Yada, and he offered on this altar as he did in Bethel, sacrificing on the golden circular altars he had made, and at Bethel he also installed the priests of the high places which he had built. Now they could be of any body, anyone that they wanted, because you see here in 1 Kings 1333, yeah, got it underlined. It says, even after this, Jeroboam did not turn from his evil ways, but continued to appoint priests from every class of people for the high places. Anyone who wanted to become a priest, he consecrated him and became one of the priests of the houses of the high places. Okay, so you didn't need to do anything. You didn't need to be holy, that's for sure. You know what they call holiness and the abominable eyes and minds of these people. So all these things were set up just to draw people further and further away. It's the same thing, remember, that Korah did and saying, we're holy too. Okay, so continue on here. These high places, this sacred pole, it says, they were equipped with altars of sacrifice, incense, stone pillars, trees, and or poles, and water, as they were objects of Yahweh's judgment. Okay, so they were told when to go into the land to destroy these things. But as it says, many were built by Solomon and many other the kings of northern Israel. Now, continue on here in section 3, it says the cult object. The passages cited above talks about Asherah as a goddess. And then look down to the bottom of the page here. It says, since the Old Testament, let's look at the second, the last paragraph there. It says, the following symbols, which represent in Semitic art, have been proposed by various scholars as illustrating the Asherah. A plain pole, a carved pole, a staff, a triangle on a staff, a cross, a double axe, a tree stump, and a headdress for the priests, and the wooden images. Okay? Now, I did a little drawing here. So these are the things that you saw. Just a pole, upright pole. You also had the pole with the triangle on it, which you see it, which is on the top of the obelisk, right? Which is in Washington D.C. and everywhere else in the world, right? In different places. Also a cross, a double-headed axe, a tree, or a stump. Okay, and if you remember the stumps and so forth, this was one of the things in which Nimrod and Semiramis, all of that worship there that set up the religious powers, that set up the religion that took over. They use these very same objects, okay? So these things go way, way back. The cross is nothing new. They know that the cross was seen back in ancient Babylon and so forth. There wasn't anything that was new that was set up. All these things go way, way back. So it says, from a study of the words used in connection with the Asherah, it's clear that it was an object which could be both constructed and destroyed by man. It was not a tree, but was made of wood or contained wood and could be burned. Okay? So it shows really that the gods are nothing. The gods can be destroyed and will be destroyed. They will be burned. Okay? And it was an object that stood upright rather than laying flat. Of course, it stood upright for the fact that, you remember what Satan says, I'm going to rise my throne up above Yahweh. Right? She was not content with having something that would be laying down, an object that was laying down. No, she wanted it standing up and projecting upward to show her resistance against the Most High. So it was employed in the worship of the goddess of the same name. Now in the King James it uses the word grove, okay? And the word grove is number 842 in Strong's, and as it shows here, number 842, it means Asherah, okay? Or Astarte, a Phoenician goddess. It comes from word 833, which means to be upright or to be straight. And like Satan counterfeits Yahweh and everything, like Yeshua said, you got to walk in the straight and the narrow way. Now, the lexicon in Veteris Testamente Libros, edited by Ludwig Kohler and Walter Baumgartner, on page 98, it shows the word Asherah means a sacred pole, okay? Asherah, sacred pole set up near the altar. Now remember, Yahweh's The law was, do not set up a sacred pole next to my altar, okay? Because he knew that they were going to do it anyway. But this sacred pole was called Asherah, and the Asherah was the cult object, the perpendicular sacred pole of sun worship. And it was used to find the sun equinoxes and the sun solstices, okay? The equinox is supposed to be equal day and night. Solstices was the longest days and shortest days and so forth. But this is, in fact, this is what actually upset King Josiah. It's what upset him so much, because Josiah knew after he read the law of Yahweh that Yada was not following the statutes of Yahweh to set the feast. Okay, and Yada still continues to do this sin this day, right? They still use it, as we just seen in those pictures there at the Vatican. Okay, and that is the tribe of Yada, who is ruling over on the seven hills of Rome at this time. So King Josiah knew that they weren't worshiping Yahweh. They weren't keeping the feast in the way that it's supposed to be. They knew that they were following the statutes of sun worship instead. So here's some history of what took place. In 2 Kings 22:13, it says, "Go and inquire of Yahweh for me, for the people and for all Yada, about the words of the book that has been found." Remember, we saw in the very beginning of this book that King Josiah found that book, right? Remember, they found the book of the law, and they read it, and Josiah became very upset and terrified, but for the fact that he realized the horror that the people had committed these sins, okay? Now, he says, "Great is Yahweh's judgment that burns against us, because our fathers have not obeyed the laws or the words of this book, to do all that is written concerning us." Then the king went to the house of Yahweh, along with all the men of Yada, and all the people of Jerusalem, the priests, the prophets, and all the people, both great and small. He read in their hearing all the words of the book of the covenant, which had been found in the house of Yahweh. Then the king commanded Hilkiah, the high priest, the priests of the second rank, and the doorkeepers, to bring out of the house of Yahweh all the articles that were made for Baal, for the grove Asherah, and for all the host of heaven. Now, can you imagine? Here was the house of Yahweh, which King David had made, but yet they had taken out all the things that were dedicated to Yahweh, and actually had brought in all of these things, and even had set up an Asherah pole within the courts of the house of Yahweh. So you can see it was no longer Yahweh being worshipped, but Satan had complete control over it. So, as time went on, of course, she continued to keep control over it. Well, he burned them outside of Jerusalem in the fields of the Kidron Valley, and took the ashes to Bethel, the house of God. He expelled the pagan priests, ordained by the kings of Yada to burn incense on the high places of the cities of Yada, and on those around Jerusalem. Those pagan priests who burned incense to Baal, to the sun, to the moon, to the constellations of all the hosts of heaven. Now remember, Yahweh says when you go outside and you look up and you admire his creation, you admire it. But don't bow down and worship these things, okay? Because they represent, the gods make their representation in these things. And this is one of the laws of Yahweh that says, don't do this. He took the grove, the Asherah pole, out of the house of Yahweh, and he brought it to the Kidron Valley outside Jerusalem, and burned it in the Kidron Valley. He ground it to ashes, then threw the ashes over the graves of the common people. So you can see what he's doing here. Although the priests of the high places did not approach the altar of Yahweh in Jerusalem, they did eat unleavened bread among their fellow priests. Then the king defiled and desecrated the high places east of Jerusalem, on the south of the Mount of Corruptions, which Solomon king of Israel had built for Ashtoreth, which is of course Asherah, Easter, or Ishtar, the abomination of the Phoenicians, okay, and the abominations of the Moabites, and the abominations of the people of Ammon. He broke the images, the sacred pillars, that represented Baal, and he cut down the groves, the sacred pillars which represented Asherah, and he covered the sites with human bones. Even the altar at Bethel, the house of God, the high place built by Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who had caused Israel to commit sin, even that altar and that high place he destroyed. he burned the high place and ground it to dust and burned the sacred pole. When Josiah turned around, he saw the tombs that were on the hillside. Now what he did is, he burned this and then he scattered it out all over the place upon the graves. He took human bones and scattered them out, which defiled everything, right? So he was defiling all of these places, these high places where the gods were worshipped. So they wouldn't be used. And also that would keep the people away, right? Because if the bones of the people were out there, that was an unclean place. So to keep them away so they could actually attend the feast of Yahweh. When Josiah turned around, he saw the tombs that was on the hillside. And he ordered the bones brought out of the tombs, and he burned them on the altar, and defiled and desecrated it according to the word of Yahweh, spoken by the man of Yahweh who prophesied of these things. Now in 1 Kings 13:2 and 32, there was a prophet who described, he prophesied everything that King Josiah was doing here. He described it to a T, okay? He described it and he says, this is all going to take place. And, of course, many years later, King Josiah did actually do this. So it says, it was desecrated according to the word of Yahweh, spoken by the man who had prophesied of these things. Then Josiah asked, what tombstone is that I see? And the men of the city told him, it is the tomb of the man of Yahweh who came from Yada and prophesied of these very things you have done against the altar of Bethel, against the house of God. And the king gave this commandment to all of the people, saying, keep the Passover to Yahweh your father, just as it is written in the book of the covenant. Okay? So, he corrected the people in these things. And notice, King Josiah's command to the people was to keep the Passover according to the ordinances of Yahweh. And he knew this pole was causing the people to keep the Passover wrong. He knew that by setting up a pole for the express purpose of finding the astronomical equinoxes, and then setting the feast according to the equinox, that this was in direct violation of the ordinance of the green ears of barley, which Yahweh himself had set. Remember, this was Yahweh's law. This is Yahweh's people. This is Yahweh's covenant. After King Josiah destroyed the sacred pole, which had been used for finding the pagan equinoxes and the solstices, he then commanded the people to keep the Passover as it is written in the book of the covenant, not as they had previously been doing. Now you see, today, in these last days, Yahweh has established his house. Once again, the great house of Yahweh is on this earth. And everything that the house of Yahweh teaches is exactly according to the laws of Yahweh here. And if it's not, then correction is brought forth, and we understand, we repent from it, and we change to do exactly what Yahweh wants us to do, as it is written in his word. Okay? King Josiah fulfilled the prophecy written about him in 1 Kings 13:2 and 32. According to the word of Yahweh, King Josiah, let me read that. 1 Kings 13, let's see, what does it say? Verse 2 and verse 32. Verse 2 says, okay, behold, a man of Yahweh came from Yada by the word of Yahweh to Bethel, and Jeroboam was standing by the altar to make an offering. He cried out against the altar by the word of Yahweh, and he said, altar, altar, this is what Yahweh says. Behold, a son shall be born to the house of David, Josiah, by name, and upon you he shall sacrifice the priests of the high places who burn incense on you, and men's bones shall be burned on you. And he gave them the sign the same day, saying, this is the sign that Yahweh has given. The altar will be split apart, and the ashes shall be poured out. Now, he even named Josiah. Okay, you see that? He was even named in there. And then in verse 32, it says, because the prophecy cried out by the word of Yahweh against the altar in Bethel and against the houses of the high places in the cities of Samaria, it will surely come to pass. Okay? And it has. It did. It did come to pass, just like Yahweh prophesied. When he inspires a man to do something, it's going to come to pass. It's according to his word. And that's what the law says. You want to test a prophet, whether a prophet is of Yahweh? See what he says. If it comes to pass, you know he's of Yahweh. Okay, so after he destroyed these abominable objects in the house of Yahweh, he commanded the people, saying, keep the Passover to Yahweh as it is written. Now look again at this diagram here from the echoes of the ancient skies, the astronomy of lost civilizations. The central observation post in the center of this diagram is where the sacred pole stood. Okay? Those of you who don't have a book, this is what it looks like. Okay, so this is where the pole stood. And this is the summer solstice. This is the sunrise at the equinoxes. This is the sunset, the solstice, and summer solstice sunrise. The sunrise at the equinoxes and the winter solstice at sunrise. So you had that pole set up and you had all these little minute markings all the way around, and you could tell where the markings were, where the shadow had cast. Now, can you imagine Noah setting all this up inside the ark? And how's he going to get sun in the ark to begin with? You know, it's crazy. But that's what they want you to believe. Well, this central observation post, or this pole, which the sun's shadow struck, which exactly ascertained the solstices and equinoxes, notice that these little dots going around, that's what this picture here, remember, represented. All of these going around here. Okay? And it forms, notice, it forms a circle. It forms a circle. Well, the prophet Jeremiah warned against the use of the sacred poles to set the feasts, which Yahweh called abominations. Abominations of the one who desolates. Of course, Satan herself. However, due to the false pen of the scribes, the translators, in Jeremiah 8:8, if you remember, this writing, remember Jeremiah 8:8, it says they have written it wrong. They have written the prophecies and the laws wrong, the translators. This warning in Jeremiah 3:9 was covered up. Notice how it says in the King James, and it will come to pass through the lightness of her whoredom that she defiled the land and committed adultery with stones and with stocks. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, right? Makes as much sense as don't plant a grove. What's a grove? You know? It just doesn't make any sense the way that they write it to hide things. But notice this word stones. She committed adultery with stones. Now it's talking about whoredom. It's talking about defilement. And she committed adultery with stones. The word stones means, it shows it here in the Analytical Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon of the Old Testament. If you don't have a book, it actually tells you what it is. And what it is these exact things that you just seen. It's stones of desolations, minutely measured off, and that's exactly what you find right here. Each one of these stones is measured the exact distance all the way around. That's the stones it's talking about. The word stocks, it says, she committed adultery with stones and with stocks. The word stocks means a staff or a pole. That's exactly what you see right here in this picture. That's the pole. This was whenever they would look for it, casting the shadow and so forth. Okay? So the same exact thing you see is on display for the whole world to see. If anyone has to look at the Vatican, they can see it. It's there. It's very plain and obvious. You know, but people try and look at this stuff and say, oh, that's the old ancient days. Ain't nobody does that no more, you know. They certainly do. They certainly do. That's what the Wiki religion and so forth is about too. But this is those who use the sacred poles. Okay, they measured off a circle of minutely and accurately measured points around the center pole, so the shadows cast by the sun would indicate the equinoxes and the solstices. Now, the thing is that Yahweh doesn't say anything at all about that. But this same circle of minutely measured points around a center pole is created in the courtyard of St. Peter's Cathedral in the Vatican, as we just saw. And notice the same stones and stocks. And that's not just a fence It's in an upright pillar, but it's exactly what they said. Now here you see here, there's the high place, okay? Looks like the Aztec calendar, which they were very heavy into God worship, okay? But over here you see the zodiac and all of these different wheels and so forth, okay? And that's the picture that you just seen right over here with in the Vatican. So notice carefully the reconstructed high place here that we looked at, and you can see that center pole. Remember, you see that center pole right here where the sun's coming up. This is what they looked at and could observe from a high place. Now, the zodiacs, okay, the zodiacs is a Greek word for Babylonian invention, but it came from the worship of the sun, and the Egyptians also will worship the sun. Of course, their big Egyptian sun god, okay, is the same one that they pray to, how they end their prayers. The whole Christian church ends their prayers in honor to their sun god. But they don't even realize what they're even saying. Now remember, that also refers to the hidden God. It's hidden from them. They do not know who they are worshiping. And that's exactly what Yeshua said, remember? He said, you don't know who you worship. If you did, you wouldn't be worshiping who you do. But the shadows of the Egyptian obelisk, called the gnomon, all right, or one who knows, determine the equinoxes and the solstices, which determine the time of the new year at the vernal equinox for the Babylonians. In the book Time and Its Measurement, page 19, it tells us about magic and religion. It says, from a study of the shadows of the obelisk, the Egyptians found the length of the year. They discovered the summer and the winter solstices, okay? Now remember, the Egyptians was the first world ruling empire. And if you go back into Genesis, you remember this was Ham's lineage, okay? And just like you had Seth's lineage, which carried on the laws of Yahweh, Ham's went out and they spread out and took over and developed the Nimrod system and so forth. Now, for human achievement, that's a big thing, just like the Greeks and stuff could know exactly. They even knew the diameter of the earth. They figured all of that out, and so forth. I mean, it's the big brains of people, But this is what's built upon today, is the schools of higher learning. The professors proclaim that they know so much, to where they put down the little people because they're so high and mighty, because they're so knowledgeable. The problem is they don't have any sense. They're dumb. Okay, they have all of the knowledge, they have no wisdom. And what does the scripture say? Knowledge without wisdom is useless. Okay, it's totally useless. And the beginning of wisdom is what? Knowing Yahweh, right? Knowing Yahweh. That's the beginning. That's how you start becoming wise, is to know who Yahweh is, and then you begin to go up that way. That's the real school of higher learning. You're sitting in the school of higher learning. Okay? And that's what these classes are about. That's what liturgy means. It means being taught by Yahweh. Okay? We go through this material to be taught of these things. And it's very important. Don't you see, you can hear it over and over and over again, but you are the one, in your own mind, in your own studies, you have got to understand what sun god worship is. You've got to understand what God worship is. You can hear it over and over and over again and think you know it, but I guarantee you, I could throw stuff in there and you wouldn't even recognize it. It would be God worship. Because you've got to study this and you've got to understand what it is. Because if you do, you will not be deceived. Okay? And that's why Yahweh's house teaches these things. So it says here, the summer solstice occurs around the 21st of the 6th Roman month. Now that's around that time, but it's not actually. Okay? Now the vernal equinox is supposed to be on the 21st, right? That's the quote-unquote day. That's their traditional day. if you check with the U.S. Naval Observatory, they'll tell you that the vernal equinox is actually on the 17th of the third Roman month. So they don't even keep their vernal equinox on the correct day, okay? It's already changed on them. So it shows that man's way of reckoning time and so forth is not even accurate in itself, you know? So the summer solstice occurs around the 21st of 6th Roman month, when the altitude of the sun at noon reaches its highest point, and the shadow of the obelisk is shortest. This is the longest day of the year. At the winter solstice, the shadow of the obelisk is the longest. This is why they observed it from a high place, where they could see the length, okay, of the shadow that was being cast. This occurs around the 21st of the 12th Roman month, when the altitude of the sun is at the lowest point and marks the shortest day of the year. Between these 2 points, at about 321 and 921, which we call the vernal or spring and autumn equinoxes, they found day and night were of equal length. Now, many people of the ancient world marked these days by feasts or religious observances. The celebrations of Easter and Christmas, which occur about the times of the vernal equinox and the winter solstice, had counterparts in Egypt, Persia, India, pagan Rome, and also among the Aztecs of South America. See, this is what blew the missionaries away. You got to realize, okay, when it became the age of discovery, okay, when they went out in their ships and they went out and started discovering all these different lands and taking over and so forth, they always had missionaries with them. Okay, they always had the Catholic priests, the Catholic monks and so forth went out with them on the ship. When they went to the land, they went to convert those poor old heathens. Okay, and either they would convert to religion of the Catholic Church, or they were worthy of death. They were just scum buckets because they weren't worthy to live, you know. But if they became a Catholic, okay, then they could live. If they weren't, they were ready to put them all to death and stuff. But this is how they set these things up, and like it says, the Aztecs, okay, the Aztecs were the South American Indians, so to speak, okay. What surprised these high and mighty priests? Now, remember, the priests were the ones. You remember, the book of Yahweh had been taken away, so the priests were the ones who had all the knowledge because they were the learned men, right? So if you had a question, you had to go to the priest, and the priest could tell you what it was. You have to worry about that, reading that old Bible, man. Don't worry about that. You don't need that. We just burned all those things. You don't have one, right? You come to me, and I'll tell you what it is. Well, what surprised them is that when they went on these missionary trips and they went to these different places, they actually found these quote-unquote heathens worshiping the same gods and goddesses and performing the same ceremonies to the sun. And so now all they had to do is, when they take these pagan festivals, it's just given a Christian name, and it was okay. So they would baptize the heathen and say, okay, you just go ahead and continue on worshiping the way you are, just call it Christmas instead of your sun god and so forth, you know. And so this is how the foolishness continued on to these different places. But they found all of this stuff everywhere that they went. They even found the crosses and stuff, you know, and the different things. So it just surprised them because they thought they were the only ones who did these things. But they didn't. Remember, it spread out. You go back to Genesis, and Genesis tells you the end from the beginning, right? It tells you that they spread out they went out from there, that area, and they spread out to Egypt and all the different places, and they began to spread out throughout the whole world in those different areas. Real quickly here, it says, with these corrections replaced in Jeremiah 3:9, the book of Yahweh says, this was because her iniquity mattered so little to her that she led the land to defilement and committed apostasy with sacred poles and wooden gods. Okay? It doesn't say, like, you know, in the King James here said that she committed whoredom and committed adultery with stones and stocks. Okay? But it actually is that she committed this abominable thing. She defiled and committed apostasy with sacred poles and wooden gods. Okay? And of course, that's exactly what Israel did in her worship. Now, it also continued on. It says the Spanish conquistadors witnessed Aztec ceremonies dedicated to their sun god, and they branded them as heathen counterfeits of Christian sacraments. Why, these guys can't be doing this. We'll just sprinkle a little bit of water on their forehead, and now you're baptized. Go ahead. You can continue doing what you're doing. No problem. Okay? That was the logical sense that they had, it just shows the foolishness, but it shows the great deception. It shows the great power that Satan has and what she was able to do. Because you think about it, for 6,000 years, she has been able to keep mankind deceived without destroying himself. There's trillions of people that have been born, But mankind hasn't wiped itself out yet. So she's very clever in the way and very sneaky in the way that she rules different things. But, of course, that time is coming when it will be too late. And, of course, she will be judged for all the things that she has done, and all those who decide to follow her will also suffer the consequences. But Yahweh's people will be delivered at a time. May Yahweh bless you, man. We're going to stop here on page 96. Page 96 of the Red Book.